Hey friend, in today's watercolor tutorial, I'm going to be showing how to paint this landscape of Acadia National Park in Maine. Without further ado, let's get painting. For today's watercolor tutorial, I'll be using Cobalt Turquoise Light, Sap Green, Perylene Green, Payne's Gray, Naples Yellow, Burnt Umber, and Permanent Rose by Winsor & Newton. I'll also be using a little bit of white gouache. The brushes I have on hand are size 16, size 6, size 2 round Princeton brush, and the artwork I've taped down we'll be painting with today is a size 5 by 7 inches. I want to do a wash of water to get going on our sky. And I'm just going to do a really light pale yellow sketch line using our Naples Yellow. And just about the top fourth or third, I'm just going to do a little bit of a light pale sketch line, just like so. And from there, I'm just going to do a little wash of water. And it's okay that the Naples Yellow bleeds a little bit into the sky. We do want a hint of this yellow. And I'm just going to take a little bit of Naples Yellow for the first centimeter or so and just lay that out because we've got a nice pastel sunset that we're painting here. And I'm just adding a good saturation of that. And next, I am going to just rinse my brush, and I want to take just a hint of our rose color. And I've got some permanent rose, which is pretty vibrant, and I'm just going to do a little layer of that. And then once I apply it, I really would like to kind of just add a little bit more in some random patches just to loosen up the sunset and not make it look so blocked off. So I've got some pale streaks of permanent rose. I'm just loosely incorporating. I'm taking just a little bit more on my brush just to have a concentration of a couple areas where the rose color kind of stands out and pops. All right, and then from here, I want to get a little bit of Cobalt Turquoise Light, and I'm just going to add a few touches of it. And it looks like my paper is already drying because it's quite hot today. So I just applied a few touches of that color, but then I'm just going to do another wash with my brush just to buff it out a little bit and get a little bit more water on my page. And then I'm just going to add just a few touches where it's a little bit more concentrated of the Cobalt Turquoise. All right, and then from here, I want to take just a little bit of Payne's Gray. And using the Payne's Gray, I just want to get a little bit more depth into our sky. So I'm just applying a little bit of it up in the upper kind of corners of the page a little bit and just letting it do its thing and dry. But this is just giving it a nice depth and shadow to the sky, so that way it's not too pale. Okay, so now I am just going to let the sky hang out and dry, and while it dries, I actually want to get going on some of our rock formations that we're going to have in the bottom third of the artwork. So to get started on that, I would like to first just kind of lightly sketch a little bit of some of our rock formations down below. So I'm just taking a little bit of our burnt umber, and just an inch from the bottom left corner, I'm gonna do kind of a curved C curve. From here, I'll do another one, and then kind of a elongated rainbow curve. And from here, I kind of am gonna have some foliage, so I don't really need to put some rock formation shapes there. But once I have that sketch, I'm actually going to kind of sketch where our foliage will lie so we don't paint brown where the green will go. So our foliage is going to be in this kind of loose oval shape. And from here, I'm just gonna do a wash of water to fill in this area here. And I wanna first get a really pale wash of our burnt umber. And I'm still using my size 16 brush just to get a good saturation of color. So we've got this nice wash. I'm gonna add just a touch more. Okay, and then I'm gonna take a little bit of Payne's Gray. And what this is gonna do is just add a little bit more depth and shadow. I don't want our rocks to be super all warm toned. I want a little bit of an undertone of coolness to the color. And so just by adding a really pale watered down value of Payne's Gray, I'll be able to tone down some of the warmness from the burnt umber. Okay, now I'm just gonna let this area sit and dry. I'm gonna tap my sunset, and believe it or not, it's already dry because it's like 90 degrees today. It's July, I'm in California, I'm sitting, and I am sweating. Okay, so anyways, next up, I'm gonna take my size 6 brush, and I wanna do a subtle outline of a mountain kind of in the distance. And I'm gonna use some watered down Payne's Gray. And to start, I'm actually gonna paint a Payne's Gray line with a little bit of a gap just below where the Naples Yellow lies. Just like so. And then from here, I'm going to paint a little hilltop curve. Then I'm gonna do a larger, wider one next to it. And then kind of just a softer curve. And then let this slope down a little bit. I'll have it slope back up, just like so, towards the end. And then from here, I'm just gonna take some Payne's Gray and fill this area in. And it's nice and off in the distance, but I'm just gonna go ahead and fill that all up. I just want to take a little bit of Payne's Gray and sketch out just a little bit more of some of our land formations. So just about an inch from the left side of the page, I'm gonna do a sloping curved line, and I'm just using some watered down Payne's Gray for my sketch color. And then once we reach just a little bit over halfway, I'm gonna do a crooked dash line. And then another small one, just like so. And then I'm gonna bring it back in a little bit, then do another little dash line. And then slowly bring it a little bit more angled towards the left side of the page. So I've got two kind of angled horizontal lines there. Then I'm going to simply slope another line outward towards the right. And then back in again, and then one more rounded one. and just slope it back inward, just like so. So this is going to be some of our land formations. And I am going to start building some of the color for this by painting some burnt umber all along the bottom edges of our sketch. From here, I'm just going to take some water because I want the burnt umber to blend into some of the green that we're going to apply next, and I don't want a really harsh transition line. So I'm just applying some water directly above that area. And I'm going to add a nice wash of water all along here. And while this area is still wet, I want to take just some plain Sap Green and do a nice wash of Sap Green. We're going to add some Perylene Green and some Payne's Gray later, but I just want this nice wash just to be our base. I'm even going to allow some of the Sap Green to go above this Payne's Gray line and form a small little sloping hill. And because we've got a good saturation of this color and some water here, I am simply going to just take my brush with some of that Payne's Gray and buff out that water line. Sorry, with the Sap Green, not the Payne's Gray. We're overlapping on top of the Payne's Gray. All right, and we've got a little bit of a water line happening here, so I'm just gonna take my brush with some plain water and soften that transition area. Want to layer up just a little bit more vibrant burnt umber so it doesn't get too lost. Okay, so now that our rock formations are dry, I want to take some burnt umber and mix it up with some Payne's Gray. My palette is due for a cleaning, but it's all good. So I've got some Payne's Gray, some burnt umber, and I'm mixing in some Payne's Gray just to help soften it a little bit. And I would like to just start to outline some rock formations. So I'm starting with this rounded kind of hilltop line. Then from here, I want to do another little outline. And I'm really just kind of loosely doing these rounded curves. So really loose geometric shapes here. Very irregular and kind of jagged. Okay, so this is kind of my loose form for our rocks. And while the crevice area is dry, I'm actually going to start to apply just a touch of texture to our green here that's just slowly starting to get absorbed by the paper. So I just want to dabble with the tip of my brush some Perylene Green, allowing some of the Sap Green behind it to pop. And right along here, I will have a harsher line, kind of breaking up the two hills of greenery. And then I'm just buffing this area out by incorporating a little bit more of the Perylene Green up above. And I'm just gonna do just a touch more Perylene Green in this shaded area between the two hills. Let's go ahead and revisit our rocks. So rocks can honestly be, for me, a little bit tricky, but something I like to keep in mind is that they're imperfect. Like they're jagged, they're loose, they're irregular. I think the main target point is having a highlight and a little bit of shadow. And I'm kind of alternating between burnt umber and then the blend of the Payne's gray and burnt umber for a little bit of a cooler tone. And I'm just shading part of the rock towards the left side because our sun is coming, or it's really set, but our highlight is kind of more angled towards the right top area. So I'm not letting that get overran by the shaded colors, but I'm just adding some texture, some really loose brushwork. And I just really want to make sure that I can have a little bit of variegation in color. And I'm even going to do a little bit of dry brush technique using the base belly of my brush. I just take my brush and do a little bit of dragging, and you get this nice texture in doing so. But I'm kind of painting over the crevice lines a little bit just to make them a little bit darker. And then on the left side here, I'm adding more concentration of color. And I'm just carrying on this process by adding some more of our Payne's gray and burnt umber blend. And then from here, using some dry brush technique just to help buff it out slightly. And just to give some irregular texture to the rock so it's not perfectly smooth. And again, on occasion, I'm taking just some straight burnt umber just to help shade some of the crevice lines as well. Definitely take your time with this. You can even pause and rewind certain parts. Okay, so I'm just gonna carry on this technique for the rest of my rock formations. And as needed, I may need to remix a little bit more of my Payne's gray and burnt umber blend, but overall, I'm just gonna make sure that I've got a light source. I've got some irregular, jagged kind of brushwork here using the dry brush technique, and I'm just carrying that on for the rest of the rocks. I'm going to take some Sap Green just to kind of do what we did over here. I'm just doing a base coat of Sap Green, and I'm overlapping just a touch on this rock over here. And then I'm simply just going to saturate this area with a nice wash. And then I want to do a little bit of texture with the tip of my brush. And it's going to kind of veer off a little bit towards the right. And while that is still wet, I just want to take some Perylene Green just to give our foliage here some shading and variegation. Especially towards the bottom and a little bit towards the top as well. And I'm making sure just to paint around the roundness of this boulder rock down below. Alrighty, and then from here, I just want to use the tip of my brush just to gently tap and get this nice loose texture. And then I'm just adding this texture a little bit throughout. Before I move forward, I actually want to take a little bit of Naples Yellow to give a slight highlight in our bush area. So I'm just going to tap just a touch of Naples Yellow in here, just to give a nice soft highlight. Once this area towards the edge is dry, I'm going to add a wash of water all throughout this area. And we are basically going to be working with our Cobalt Turquoise Light, just a touch of Naples Yellow, and some Payne's Gray for our body of water. And once that's dry, we'll also add a little bit of some highlights using our white wash. Just something to keep in mind, we will have some trees in this general area and some in this left area. So I'm intentionally gonna be keeping those relatively blank of the blue. It's okay if some of the blue bleeds in a little bit because the green will overlap nicely, but you definitely don't want some deep like Payne's Gray action in this area or in this area here. Just something to keep in mind. So now that this page is saturated, I want to incorporate some Cobalt Turquoise Light. And it's one of my favorite colors to work with. It's so vibrant and pretty. And I'm just going to add a nice wash of it. And I'm just gonna keep this area blank and this area blank again, just to make sure that I'm not oversaturating where the pine trees are going to be. And I'm just doing a nice coating of this vibrant color. And I'm going right in this little kind of crevice area behind the hill. Alrighty, now while this is still wet, I'm just gonna rinse my brush and grab some Naples Yellow. I just wanna do a hint of the Naples Yellow in here, just a little bit of a glow. Not too much, just very subtle. And then from here, I am going to switch gears to my size 2 brush, and I want to use some Payne's Gray just to add some depth to our water. So I'm going to start just below this kind of island we've got. It's not an island, but the shore here. And I'm just going to start by adding a touch of Payne's Gray down below, allowing it to softly bleed out using some of this wet and wet technique. Gonna go ahead and add some underneath here as well. And then I'm going to continue kind of layering some of this Payne's Gray just below, just building that depth. And from here, I want to just take some more watered down Payne's Gray and incorporate just a few horizontal, just left to right motion streaks in the water, just very loosely. I'm going to add a few like patches of the Payne's Gray, and then taking some water just to buff it out. I'm going to use this watered down brush just to help dilute that Payne's Gray a little bit and just layer it about. And I'm gonna leave this area here just blank. I do want some highlights as well where it's a nice glowing kind of pastel cobalt turquoise popping through. But I'm just gonna go through and add a few touches more of the Payne's Gray and then allow the water to dry before we add our pine trees. Before we move on to our pine trees, I'm just going to take a blend of Sap Green and Perylene Green, so kind of a nice mid-tone green. And using my size 2 brush, I just want to add some texture using the tip of my brush to this kind of bushy foliage area, just adding a little bit more texture. Using some of that blend of the Sap Green and Perylene Green using my size 2 brush, I just want to go on the ridge of this island area and add a little bit of some kind of just simple dash line texture just to mimic the silhouette of some distant pine trees. And I'm simply just tapping this area here. And while that area is still wet, I'm just going to take some plain water and buff out that kind of harsher transition. Just using some water, it's going to kind of blend out a little bit. And I'm just applying a little bit of pressure in certain areas using that up and down motion just to get any water lines. And that is our just really simple loose texture there. Next, I want to switch gears using our size 6 brush, and I'm just going to start with a simple wash of Sap Green. And I want to incorporate the Sap Green starting just at the bottom of here, this little base area, and then just a little bit above this rock, and then in this general white area. So I'm just gonna simply do a really nice wash of the Sap Green, and then we will add more of our pine tree details. Okay, starting with just Sap Green, before we add any Perylene Green as our shaded color, I wanna lay out our pine trees using the Sap Green. And I'm simply just gonna start by laying out some of our trunks using the Sap Green for now. We will add a touch of our burnt umber in a bit, but for now I just kind of want to get this laid out here where our pine trees will be. Okay, so now I've got my row of pine trees, and I want to switch gears now to our size 2 brush, and using the Sap Green to start, I just want to fill in these trees with some brush strokes to mimic our branches, and I'm following a really loose, kind of almost just cone shape where the top is narrow, and as the tree gradually gets more towards the base, it starts to increase in width. And so just keeping that in mind, I am just gonna carry that technique over with the tops being very, very narrow and loose, and then just taking my brush and on either side adding some brush strokes for our branches. While the sap green sets and dries, I want to add just some details to some of this burnt umber area up against the shore. So I'm just going to use the Payne's Gray and burnt umber blend we used previously for the rock shading here. And I just want to add a little bit of some depth and just some irregular brushwork using the tip of my size 2 brush just to add a little bit of variegation and almost some like rock quality to this shoreline. Acadia has a lot of beautiful kind of boulders and rocks. So I'm just taking my brush and doing some really just loose brushwork up against the shore. So I'm starting at the base and then I slowly just kind of incorporate and add just a few dashes of this color. Alrighty, and then I want to take just a hint of Payne's Gray and just incorporate a little bit more contrast by adding some Payne's Gray in this area, dividing up these two kind of hills here. So I'm just adding a little bit more Payne's Gray on top of that Perylene Green that we did previously, just to give a little bit more depth and texture. And just looking at our shoreline and taking a step back, I just want to take some water using my size 2 brush just to smooth out a couple of areas so it's not looking perfectly like overly textured, if that makes sense. So I'm just doing just a couple areas. I still want some texture, but I don't want it to be too perfectly textured in those areas. You want some areas that are kind of looser and buffed out. Okay, so next what I want to do is take some Perylene Green and I just want to add some shading using my size 2 brush, and I'm just outlining the outline of our rock formation here, and mostly on the left side of the trees I'm going to add some Perylene Green and at the base of the trees. So towards the bottom I'm adding that nice depth and shading, and then towards the left side I'm just using the tip of my brush with light weight and a light hold to add a little bit of texture, just to give a little bit more of a pop to the pine trees. And again, I'm not forgetting to add that Perylene Green towards the base either. And I'm just going to carry this on through all of the trees. Before we move on to add some highlights with our gouache, I just wanted to point out that in the foliage kind of bushy area below, to buff that out, if you have a harsh line of Perylene Green, simply just take a bit more Perylene Green and add some dots in this textured area, just like so, and that'll help kind of soften that transition into the bush and meeting the pine trees. Okay, so now we can go ahead and rinse off our size 2 brush nicely, and I want to use some white gouache to add some kind of whitewash on the shoreline here and a little bit in the ocean itself. And I am simply just going to take some white gouache on my damp size 2 brush, and starting in this shoreline here, it's a little bit in between a couple trees, but I'm just gonna add some white as a nice pop, really loose. And I'm gonna do the same thing over beneath this area. I may need some more water here and there just to drag and glide that white gouache across. And I'm just simply kind of carrying it over really loosely, so it's just a soft, subtle texture. And from here, I just want to take some more of the white gouache and just glide it a little bit on the shore here. This is just making a really beautiful contrast and pop up against some of the shadows that we have. And as the white gouache dries, you can add some more if needed to have some areas that are a little bit more highlighted than others. And I'm just using the tip of my brush just to give a little bit of texture to the whitewash, so that way it looks like the shore has some loose kind of crashing of waves happening. And then I'm gonna add just a few touches of plain white gouache just down below in a moment. And I just want to have this as kind of a simple highlight, using that kind of subtle horizontal left to right motion and just adding a few dashes of the white. Our final step, I'm just going to take a little bit of burnt umber to paint just a few dashes of brown and just a couple of the trees, not all of them, just to show a little bit of variegation that some of the pine trees, you can have some of the trunks visible. And I'm not going too overboard, but just a little bit, just to give a little bit of pop and detail to the trees here. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial today. Thank you so much for joining me in painting this landscape of Acadia National Park in Maine. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss any further tutorials.